media output on gun regulation is causing the sales in guns. Welcome to my office. I graduated from Virginia Tech. I graduated from the Department of Engineering, Science and Mechanics. My department, 1 year after I left, experienced one of the worst mass shootings ever, which took the life of one of my committee members. I was shaken by these events, and I kept for several years the idea of contributing somehow to understanding better, helping if possible in identifying policies that could mitigate this incredible problem. So it took a while until I found my way, and I was able to make some substantial contributions that have been the object of my work for the last 5 to 7 years. As of today, we may likely have more guns than people in the US. We are talking about over 400 million guns over a population of about 300 million. So I started this research as a side project. We wrote a large grant which was funded by the National Science Foundation, which provides a framework for studying gun-related harm in the United States with an excellent team of researchers from Georgia State University, Northeastern and UCLA.
So my current research is dealing with how different firearm laws can effectively reduce different firearm harms. For example, homicides with firearms or suicides with firearms.
Gun violence is, in my opinion, a very much understudied problem. It's much more understudied than, for example, tobacco or opioids. It's not a topic that has gathered tremendous interest from a research point of view. Part of the challenge is with data availability. We have challenges in measuring gun prevalence. So most of the time we utilize descriptors which are indirect proxies of gun prevalence. For example, the background checks, which is an indicator of a possibility of a gun acquisition. This data is available only at the state level with a resolution of about a month. So it's good data, but may not be the best data. So part of the research is on how can we fill this gap and produce indirect measures that can be more timely, potentially doing forecast of violence, so that a policymaker can effectively tease out the role of a specific policy that they have in mind.
There are not very many firearm laws that were passed in the US, and among them you have very different types of laws that try to address very different aspects of gun violence, and so sometimes laws are passed very close to one another, so it's very difficult to disentangle which law caused the effect that we are observing. Fame-seeking mass shooters act very differently from other mass shooters in the sense that they try to gain as much fame as they can through their attack. Usually, this kind of mass shooters also divulge some details about their plan in advance, and that opens the door for interventions. Specifically, we have the red flag laws where you can prevent an individual from obtaining firearms by flagging them in the system.
The work that we are doing can be organized into 3 different levels of different granularity. So we go from understanding individual human behavior, how a potential perpetrator can plan their attack, or why an individual decides to buy a gun, to the level of a community or the state, at which we try to understand the role of different policies on prevalence and violence, and ultimately the level of the nation in which people are interacting with their government, states are interacting with each other, policies diffuse across boundaries, guns may be traveling across boundaries as well, and how, as a collective, this system evolves over time. So these are the three layers. We call them the micro, the meso, and the macro scale. What we try to do is overcoming traditional techniques which are based on correlation. Correlation is a general relationship between two variables in which we don't know if one is causing the other or vice versa. We simply know that there is a connection between them. So what we try to do is to bring into techniques from causal discovery which we have developed over the years to study collective behavior, to study leader-follower relationship in fish, to understand collective behavior of human crowds. This research may sound very different, but in reality they have a lot of similarities. What we are studying from a very general perspective is a complex system in which you have several individual units interacting, and what we are trying to do is to detect, infer, discover the relationships between any of the nodes within the system. So in the case of a school of fish, we are trying to understand how a leader is influencing a follower, what type of information do they share, what are the cues that they utilize for their interaction. When we talk about gun violence, the nodes in the system can be gun prevalence, gun violence, regulations, and what we are trying to understand is how these nodes influence one another, what are the mechanisms, and what are the time scale of their interactions. And try to understand if with these techniques we could overcome correlation and be able to dig deeper into potential causal links between salient variables with respect to gun violence. More specifically, we looked at the relationship between violence and prevalence. So if you perform a simple correlation, you would discover that there is a spike in gun sales every time there is a mass shooting. We started to look at the role of media. So many times after a mass shooting, we would see on the media different political parties advocating for different regulation, sometimes advocating for stricter rules, sometimes for looser policies which are looser. So what we expected and what we discovered at the end was that the relationship between media output on gun regulation is causing the sales in guns. So people are not buying guns because they fear for themselves, but they are buying guns because they fear that some new regulation may come up that could curtail their access to guns. The more regulations you have, the more this link becomes tenuous. Because if I'm living in a state in which I have very strict regulation, whether they talk on TV, if they are gonna put new regulation or not, is not changing that much my appetite for guns. Whereas if I live in a state with very few regulation, then it is very possible that discussion on TV about guns may create some fear that my rights can be curtailed and I will not be able to buy guns in the near future.
Definitely, this research needs a lot of cross-disciplinary collaboration from people in different fields. So you need people from psychology, from sociology, medicine, policy, and so on. And also us as engineers, we can provide new methods into the field and more quantitative methods to understand the cause and effect of firearms and firearm harms.